All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Whatever time you're watching this, as always, thanks for watching Common Sense Fishing. So today's video, I'm going to be trying to break down post spawn at the lakes, and we're going to take care of post spawn at the delta as well. We've got our high tide, low tide marks. We've got our shoreline and our shoreline here with some docks. We're going to show you guys some tips and tricks to catch more and bigger post spawn fish, so stick around. All right, thanks for watching Common Sense Fishing. Hope you guys are ready for this. Ooh, yeah, she's a big girl. Ooh. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
This one's a big girl. Yeah, she's a big girl. She's a big girl. Let this big old hog go. So she's being released. Look at that. That's a 9-pound bass right there. And she is so skinny. That's an 11. That's a 10 to 11-pound head. Easy. Look at this.
We're right here at the Lake McClure.
My God,
We got Sam with his personal best right here, maybe. Personal best.
Oh, this has gotta be. Look at that. Woo. Heck yeah. Bam. We'll see you guys on the next fish.
All right, let's talk about the delta. First, we're going to go ahead and break down tidal waters, river systems, any of your river systems, river lakes, chain lakes, delta systems are kind of going to operate similar. You're going to have current moving through them. Should be a low tide, high tide, and even more tides than this, a super tide, and all kinds of different things. So your tide's not always going to be at the exact same 2 marks, but for our general purposes here, we're going to have high tide, low tide. We're going to show a standard shoreline, some docks. Most guys are going to teach you pitch and flip the dock, stuff like that. But I'm going to try to give you guys a couple other tips and tricks. Hopefully they pay off this summer, okay? We're going to back that up with some cool video out on the delta and on the lakes. So stay tuned. That's not too bad. Nice. Senko Texas rig working the shade line. Yep. We're just working the shade line here on this wall. So shade is very important as well post spawn. So thanks for watching. See you guys on the next one. All right, folks. First, I want to talk about where do these fish set up post spawn? What are they doing, right? So we know pre-spawn or spawn anyways, they're moving up into the flats, into the shallows. They're making beds. They're doing their thing. And the fry hatch, you know, they lay the eggs, they do their thing. The fry hatch, you have some fry garters for a while, and at that same time the bluegill are usually going to start to come in to spawn. The bluegill eat the fry, the big bass eat the medium size bluegill, also the smaller ones. Some of these bluegills like this just really hard for any kind of bass to get in its mouth other than a sea lion, right? So what's going to happen is the bass are going to pull back once they're done with spawn. A lot of them will. But there's going to be some that sit in little pockets and hang out, especially in the delta system because it's tidal, right? So you're going to have a current. Let's just say the current's going this way at this time. So these fish are going to stack up. Actually, if the current was going this way, I would usually expect them to stack a certain way, right? So depending on the current, they may stack at different in different spots on cover, and it doesn't hurt. So say you've got a little rocky point or something jutting out or some tulies, it doesn't hurt to cover them this way and this way just to make sure you're getting both your angles in. in case that fish is tucked up on a certain side of these 2 leaser points. So you don't want to just throw one cast at it and then consider it done. Throw a few casts, right? And then another thing I want you guys to try to do when you're at the Delta, especially, and even at these lakes too, you got to remember to get up parallel. One of my favorite things to do is to get up parallel and fish like this, where your cast is going by all of those ambush spots, okay? So that's some basics. We all know this, or most of us know this. If you didn't, hope these tips and tricks help out. Now, we're going to get into some of the little better stuff, I guess I would say. Now, a lot of the males are going to kind of be hanging in this range, and they're going to be protecting fry. They're going to be, the fry will be holding close to cover, right? And these males, a lot of the smaller males, will be protecting them. And then at a certain point, those males will turn on them, and then we'll start feeding on those fry. So the bigger females are usually, say you're at the Delta, you want to get in. I'm going to break down a couple of lures real quick, so I hate to jump all over the place, but try to follow along here. I'm going to be throwing almost exclusively a square bill, right? My Biggie Papa square bill. That's my #1 go-to bait at the Delta. #2 is either going to be Wacky Rig Cinco, or with a bullet weight Texas Rig Cinco, right? So #2, Cinco. And #3, any form of top water. That's my cruddy little frog there, right? So 3 lures you can have on your boat at the California Delta and never have to switch from, and smack bass almost all times of the year. Is going to be a good crankbait, a Cinco or stick bait, and some top water. Okay. Now, how am I going to use these lures? So first, we're usually going to come in. Say these are slips and docks, right? So we're going to come in with our boat from the end of the slip, right? From out here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast alongside if there's no boats in here. And I'm going to run parallel to the walkways with either jigs, Cincos, crankbait, top water, right? And then another thing I'm going to do is get my boat really close and run my crankbait and square bill like this. Because these won't be here, right? They're going to be open water areas. And you're going to have those little walkways, right? And the boats are parked in between. So even if you've got a boat here, if your cast ability is good and you can cast up in here and work your lure like this, that's what you're going to want to do. These 3 lures that I showed you, top water, crankbait, and a Cinco. So get alongside close to the docks like this and make casts like this. So if there's any bass on the ends of these, you're going to get them. If there's any bass hanging out underneath these parallel casts, we'll get those ones. And then you usually have like the end of the dock, right? Where it's the end, and you may even have a walkway with a little bridge, right? So then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull my boat up. As I'm approaching, I'm casting like this. I'm covering all these docks, right? So as I'm fishing the Delta, I'm making sure that I'm giving every different lane or ambush spot a potential cast, meaning that I'm going to get up close to these and run my square bill, top water, or stick bait right along these edges here. And if there's a boat, right? If there's a boat tucked in here with its motor out the back, how many times you guys seen a big bass hanging out underneath a boat in the shade in the summertime? And once it sees you, it's not going to bite. This is a good way to try to get those fish to bite. So again, then I'm going to be casting and covering all this. Once I get my boat here, I may, right, cover these angles here. But then I'm going to start casting at this stuff. And depending on what I hit first, usually I'm the guy in the front, right? So as soon as my boat peeks out, I'm going to make a cast like this, and I'm going to run it down these edges. I'm going to make a cast like this, and I'm going to run it down the edges of the dock. And then I'm going to end up turning my boat eventually. Once I've covered everything I can, right, I'm going to get my boat like this, and that's where I'm going to start doing these parallel casts like this, right? And I'm going to start searching in here, even little tiny short little casts too, right? And I'm going to cover all in here, and then I pull out and go to the next boat slip. So that's fishing boat areas, slips, docks. There's a lot of that at the Delta. If you're fishing plain shoreline, use the same techniques. Every group of tule, every clump of weed that stands out and that is different further out creates a potential ambush spot. So I hope you guys enjoy these Delta tips and tricks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, while we're still on the Delta here, we're going to talk about the tides, high tide, low tide. So in high tide, when the tide is moving and it's not dead, a lot of the times, a lot of the fish will move right up against the shoreline, and any of those, again, any of these ambush spots that provide cover for a fish to sit here, depending on what way the current's coming, and come out and hit something, right? You may not find something on the plainer shore, but anything that sticks out and looks different, that's where these fish are going to be holding on right up against here on the high tide a lot of the time. Now, depending on how deep the water is and where you're at, out in the middle or away, and this is especially important in summertime, there may be plumes of hydrilla and weeds that on high tide is maybe 2 or 3 feet above the water. Then when it's low tide, the weeds are laying slack on the top of the water, and there's a bunch of them, right? So what happens is on high tide, even on low tide here, but we're going to talk about high tide, and please excuse me bouncing around a bit, after spawn, post spawn, the bass, when they start turning on the fry, will start just tearing them up, and those fry will pull off and away from shore and will hide in these weeds and clumps. And so if you have a high tide, either top water over the tops of these, if there's a fish right here, top water, or a crankbait, right? And a crankbait, what'll happen, one of the best ways to trigger post spawn strikes with a crankbait is when you're reeling it, look for those weed patches, and when you bump into it, double rip your crankbait out, and you'll pull into the weeds. Your first rip will pull it out, and it'll kind of have some weeds all stuck on the crankbait, and your second rip will basically take all the weeds off. And when that stop and go action and that ripping action, kind of like a jerk bait, happens, if there's any bass near or in that clump, it is most likely going to destroy your square bill. So if you're at high tide, try to look for and try to remember the fish are not always up against the shore, even at the Delta. If there's clumps of weeds and if there's tree stumps, things down here, those fish are going to pull off into that stuff. And this is where you're going to find a lot of the smaller males, 1 to 2 pounds. And out here is where you're going to find a lot of the bigger females. Now, when this tide drops and it gets lower, almost always you're going to find almost everything pulls out here. And the females are still going to be there. Or there's another drop, they may even back off to that next drop. They may be completely under the boat. And a little tip or trick for you guys. At the Delta, in the summertime, we have caught 3 to 5 pound bass 20 plus feet deep there, using deep diving crankbaits and drop shots on big riprap, big wood, dock pilings, all that stuff. So don't be afraid to pull out and fish the middle. The fish are not always on the shoreline. However, the shoreline provides some of the best structure and cover. However, what you want to find is that offshore stuff that provides an ambush spot, provides cover, shade. Shade is very important in the summer. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's little tips and tricks video. Smash that subscribe, like, and share. Come on back. We're going to be breaking down the lakes next for you guys. Thanks for watching Common Sense Fishing. Hope you guys enjoyed my day out on the Delta. Me, Virgil, and Basha Phil had a grand time. We stuck 2 pretty nice fish and a bunch of other 2s and maybe a couple that were almost 3 pounds and a bunch of little rat males, you know, the guys up here. So thanks for watching. Catch you guys on the next one.